Mention the name Carmen, and the mind immediately goes to the opera, a sweeping romance of passion, seduction, and tragic love. But Prosper Mérimée original 1845 novella operates on an entirely different mechanism, one that is harsh, transactional, and stripped of sentiment. Mérimée creates deliberate emotional distance right from the opening pages. The text filters the narrative through a detached, pedantic French archaeologist who is wandering through Spain in search of Roman ruins. This model illustrates the analytical framework of the story. We are looking at a set of nested realities: a clinical observer observing a tragic subject who is in turn obsessed with an uncontrollable force. Through this outer lens, visceral human violence and Romany witchcraft are analyzed with academic detachment. The narrator examines a murder with the same technical curiosity he applies to ancient linguistics. This 1830 map of Spain shows the geographical extremes driving the narrative tension. The rigid, mountainous terrain of the north stands in direct topographical contrast to the fluid, diverse landscapes of Andalusia in the south. By framing the story through this academic lens, the narrative positions a rigid, institutional order against an environment of absolute, survivalist fluidity. The framing narrative begins when the French scholar unknowingly shares a meal and a cigar with the notorious bandit Don José, shielding him from a troop of lancers. This act establishes a strict code of hospitality. By sharing bread and tobacco, the scholar creates a transactional bond of debt between himself and the outlaw. The journey moves to Córdoba, where the narrator meets Carmen on the banks of the Guadalquivir River. He is drawn to her not by seduction, but by an academic fascination with her occult practices. This occult reading is violently interrupted when Don José bursts into the room. He is prepared to kill the intruder, but recognizes the scholar and spares him, a direct repayment for the hospitality debt established in the mountains. The narrator emerges from this brush with death intact, but upon returning to his inn, he discovers that during her fortune-telling, Carmen casually stole his repeating watch. This encounter defines the narrator's role. He can observe the brutality of this ecosystem from a position of detached privilege, immune to the fatal consequences that govern Don José's life. The perspective shifts to a prison cell. Don José, now on death row, begins to dictate his descent from a respected military corporal to a condemned murderer. This timeline tracks the exact mechanism of José's ruin. We plot his starting status at the peak of his social authority, standing guard at the Seville cigar factory. The inciting incident occurs when Carmen slashes a coworker's face in the factory. José is ordered to arrest her and escort her to prison. On the way, Carmen engineers her escape. She does not do this for physical seduction, but through the precise weaponization of language. She identifies José's Basque accent. Calculating her angle, she falsely claims to be from his home region of Navarre, speaking to him directly in his native, isolated dialect. This linguistic trick short-circuits José's military programming. Upon hearing the language of his homeland, he replaces his sworn loyalty to the Spanish state with a false loyalty to a cultural countrywoman. José's downfall begins because of his greatest virtue. His deep-rooted loyalty to his heritage is the exact exploit Carmen uses to dismantle him. The immediate consequence of his dereliction of duty is severe. José is stripped of his stripes and imprisoned. While incarcerated, he receives a contraband package, smuggled in by Carmen, a loaf of bread containing an English file and a 2 piastra gold coin. At this stage, José's rigid honor code still holds firm. He refuses to use the file to saw through the bars, viewing desertion as a violation of his soldier's code. Instead, he falls into a psychological trap. José interprets the gold coin as a token of personal, romantic devotion from Carmen. This stands in direct opposition to Carmen's intent. For her, the gold is merely a transactional payment, clearing a debt according to Romany law. This creates a misalignment in their logic. José operates under the illusion of a traditional romantic bond, while Carmen continues to operate strictly on the basis of temporary transactional equivalence. José reaches his ultimate breaking point shortly after his release. Reduced to a private soldier on sentry duty, he catches Carmen entertaining his own commanding lieutenant. A fight breaks out. José draws his sword and murders the lieutenant, forcing him to flee into a life as a fugitive smuggler. Looking at the descent tracker, this is the point of no return. completely removing him from civil society. Entering the underworld, José makes a horrific discovery. Carmen is already married to Garcia el Tuerto, a brutal, highly experienced criminal. José manipulates a card game to create a pretext for a fight. He forces Garcia into a knife duel and executes him. José's motivation here is clear. He believes that by killing the husband, he acquires patriarchal ownership over Carmen, making her his exclusive wife. Carmen's reaction shatters this illusion. She mocks his Navarrese fighting stance and warns him that his rigid worldview will ultimately be his undoing. José has misunderstood the reality of the margins. He is attempting to enforce traditional, institutional marital structures onto a society that explicitly rejects them. Despite José shedding his former life and committing 2 murders for her, Carmen refuses to be owned. She immediately sets up new smuggling schemes and takes a new lover. She is drawn towards Lucas, a successful picador, pulling her into a public arena that drives José into a final, fatal jealousy. José attempts to apply the logic of the center, law and patriarchal control, to a woman who embodies the absolute autonomy of the extreme margins. Carmen's survivalism dictates that existential freedom matters more than life itself. She explicitly tells José she would rather die than submit to his ownership. José's rigid code leaves him with only one logical conclusion: the physical annihilation of the uncontrollable variable, and subsequently, himself. The narrative snaps back to the French scholar. The authorities return his stolen watch to him, now that José has been arrested and scheduled to be garroted. As these nested circles collapse, the others annihilate each other. The privileged scholar simply moves on, having safely extracted his data and his artifacts, the final output of a clinical mechanism of observation.